Alright, I wanted to check in real quick to do a short review of this book, The Plot to Seize the White House. This is one of the first big books to cover the fascist coup attempt against FDR. If you're unfamiliar with the history, here's the gist.
During the Great Depression, certain financiers and industrialists plot to overthrow President Franklin D. Roosevelt and install a dictator in his place.
To conservatives in general, and certainly to business people in particular, Roosevelt appeared as a traitor to his class.
Could a plot to create a fascist state in the U.S. have succeeded?
Considering the times and the money behind it and the power of the men behind it, they would definitely have been successful.
Join us as we go in search of history to uncover the plot to overthrow FDR.
During the Great Depression, most Americans agreed that massive reforms were needed to bring the country together. FDR's New Deal policies focused on progressive economic reforms, which were based in part on the advice of a communist named Colonel House. Roosevelt adopted policies that moved the dollar off of the gold standard, which devalued the wealth of some of Wall Street's richest businessmen. The American business community wanted the Roaring Twenties back and did not accept the new economic reforms without a fight. Today, it is well known that American businesses and investors supported Hitler and Mussolini. Companies like Ford and Koch supported the Nazis actively. Future CIA Director Allen Dulles was a Nazi sympathizer.
It's a clear historical record of an assassination of a president, and most likely, I don't know, who do you think was behind it?
I think that Allen Dulles has to be looked at a lot closer, and I think he was no longer in the CIA, but he had a tremendous amount of influence.
Prescott Bush, father of George H.W. Bush, was a banker for the Nazis, and in 1939 there was a Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden that included upwards of 20,000 people. In the 1930s, the American Nazi Party was alive and well. While Dulles and Bush were not part of the specific plot against FDR, J.P. Morgan and other Wall Street Nazi sympathizers would eventually be named in the conspiracy. Jules Archer's book, The Plot to Seize the White House, covers the 1933 business plot in detail. They hired General Smedley Butler to round up an army of veterans to march on Washington and perform a swift coup d'etat.
For big business, despotism was often a useful tool for securing foreign markets and pursuing profits. One of the U.S. Marine Corps' most highly decorated generals, Smedley Darlington Butler, by his own account, helped pacify Mexico for American oil companies, Haiti and Cuba for National City Bank, Nicaragua for the Brown Brothers Brokerage, the Dominican Republic for sugar interests, Honduras for U.S. fruit companies, and China for Standard Oil. General Butler's services were also in demand in the United States itself in the 1930s, as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sought to relieve the misery of the Depression through public enterprise and tougher regulations on corporate exploitation and misdeeds.
More power to you, President Roosevelt. The entire country's behind you, thrilled with hope and patriotism.
But the country was not entirely behind the populist president. Large parts of the corporate elite despised what Roosevelt's New Deal stood for. And so, in 1934, a group of conspirators sought to involve General Butler in a treasonous plan. But the corporate cabal had picked the wrong man. Butler was fed up with being what he called a gangster for capitalism. A congressional committee ultimately found evidence of a plot to overthrow Roosevelt. According to Butler, the conspiracy included representatives of some of America's top corporations, including J.P. Morgan, DuPont, and Goodyear Tire.
A group of Nazi and fascist-leaning businessmen sought to overthrow FDR to install a fascist dictatorship in the United States. The plan was apparently based on a veterans group in France called the Croix de Feu, which was a secretive paramilitary group that was meant to serve as the basis for America's new fascist army. General Butler infiltrated the conspiracy against FDR, he took note of the names of the co-conspirators, and eventually gave this press conference.
I appeared before the Congressional Committee, the highest representation of the American people, under subpoena to tell what I knew of activities which I believe might lead to an attempt to set up a fascist dictatorship. The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans to use as a bluff or as a club at least to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government. I talked with an investigator for this committee who came to me with a subpoena on Sunday, November 18th. He told me they had unearthed evidence linking my name with several such veteran organizations. As it then seemed to me to be getting serious, I felt it was my duty to tell all I knew of such activities to this committee. My main interest in all this is to preserve our democratic institutions. I want to retain the right to vote, the right to speak freely, and the right to write. If we maintain these basic principles, our democracy is safe. No dictatorship can exist with suffrage, freedom of speech and press.
The fascists failed and freedom was maintained. But you know what they say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That's another video for another time.